So I'm sitting here at the Harare International Airport about to leave to go to South Africa to go and kick INSCO's ass. And I'm going there already very buoyed from the aspect that we have pushed the United States to remove its illegal sanctions that were hampering the Zimbabwean economy. Now, some of you are confused. What does he mean? I mean, come on, there's still sanctions that are left on the country. Guys, 99% of the sanctions that were hindering this country from progressing have been removed. And yes, the president and the vice president, together with the president's wife, together with some very important ministers and business people, remain on the Magnitsky sanctions. But the truth of the matter is that the United States just left those sanctions together with ZASM out of embarrassment and because they wanted a few cards to put on the table, with Zimbabwe having all the cards when they negotiate reparations and the Americans fixing the damage they've done on the country and civilian lives. Our president knows that he's won. And yes, he makes political statements to force these guys to remove all their sanctions. But at the end of the day, he's won. He's going to preside over one of the fastest growing economies, because Zimbabwe is now going to grow now that those sanctions are gone. So this is a huge victory, but you need to understand how big this is. It's historical because no nation in the world has ever removed sanctions, has never had the Americans remove sanctions on them without giving the Americans what they want or without being totally destroyed. So let's look at it like this. Japan used to be a superpower, and in 1939 they were put under sanctions by the United States. The United States did not remove those sanctions until they totally destroyed Japan utilizing nuclear weapons. The Germans, another superpower, also had sanctions imposed on them in 1939. They were never removed until they were totally defeated and Hitler killed himself before those sanctions were removed. USSR, we all know that was a superpower, they had nuclear weapons, and sanctions were imposed on them, and they were not removed until the USSR was broken up into small little pieces. Zimbabwe is the only country in the world that has used the tact of international law, human rights law, pressure from humanitarian groups, international lawyers, and its neighbors, particularly South Africa, to force the Americans to remove their sanctions. So this is very monumental. This is huge. And some people say, what about ZASM? Well, ZASM doesn't matter. The president of the United States is Joe Biden. He's the employer of the directors that are in multilateral lending institutions, and he's one of the sponsors of ZASM. He can simply direct the directors that sit in multilateral lending institutions not to vote against Zimbabwe getting any loans and not to vote against Zimbabwe in cancellation of loans, or you can just ask them to sit it out. So guys, the sanctions are gone, and our president is presiding over one of the most powerful countries with the tools to be the fastest growing economy in the world. So there are so many people that have heard my statements seemingly in contradiction of the president, so they feel, oh, Rutendo is going against the president. No, guys, you need to be smarter than that. You have to understand that ZASM could have never undertaken the type of fight it undertook without the permission of Murangwe. You have to understand that we got the green light to do what we're doing because it was a multi-pronged strategy. Government was fighting in its own way in the official channels, while we were undertaking the guerrilla warfare that has pushed the Americans to remove sanctions. And I've heard Energy Mutodi starting to say, no, it was us, the Parliamentary Committee on Sanctions, who removed these sanctions and not the guys that were going to court in South Africa. My brother, we've never seen any of your body of work against sanctions. Never seen a single document, single article, single thesis that you've written against sanctions. We've never seen a single video of you. In fact, when international media contact Zimbabweans on the fight against sanctions, they don't know who you are. The Parliament of Zimbabwe has been a disappointment by failing to make laws against sanctions, and the law that you made, the only one law that you made, was from us, ZASM. We proposed it. We are the ones that came to government and said, let's create a patriotic act and an act that is tailored on the Logan Act. You started knowing about the Logan Act because of us. We've never heard you teaching the Zimbabwean people the difference between ZASM and executive order sanctions. And what you guys don't understand, it is not the court case only that brought down these sanctions. These sanctions started falling in May of 2021. after the Congress of the United States undertook what is called an impact assessment of their sanctions, then wrote a report to Joe Biden and Congress to say that our sanctions are hurting human rights and healthcare and we need to remove them. And that was because on April 18, our Independence Day in 2021, we were contacted by a lady that is an advisor to Congress as a legal and counterterrorism advisor. And she said to us, tell me, we've heard you talk about how it is that you want to go to the international courts because you believe that our sanctions are violating human rights and perpetuating a crime against humanity. Tell us about that. And we told them that your sanctions block the government of Zimbabwe, anyone from doing business with the government of Zimbabwe, its parastatals, its companies, its municipalities, and its departments that offer civilians basic human rights like healthcare, clean water, education, food, even life. And we say that by doing that, you are persecuting the Zimbabwean people, you are displacing refugees, and that is a crime against humanity according to the United Nations and the International Criminal Court. And so we also said you're also blocking people from doing business with our companies that do business with the government, and by so doing you're depriving Zimbabweans of products and services. And that is persecution, a crime against humanity, and we will lobby SADC and our government to go to international courts, while we'll also take you to other courts to try and stop the people that implement your illegal sanctions. That lady then went and wrote a report to Congress. Congress then got a message that, listen here, your sanctions are going to get you into legal trouble and you will not be able to get out of it. And that's when Karen Bass got in touch with Pollard and our parliament and asked them for a report on the impact of sanctions on civilians in Zimbabwe so that they could start undertaking an impact assessment of the sanctions. Because part and parcel of our complaint was that the United States has not followed UN guidelines on sanctions, which say you must undertake yearly impact assessments to determine whether your sanctions are affecting civilians, and if they are affecting civilians, the UN says you must remedy the impact of sanctions on civilians, and the Americans hadn't done that for 22 years. So now Congress came to Pollard and this parliament of the Mutodis and then told them they were going to do an impact assessment that was caused by us. They did the impact assessment. Pollard needed a document to give to Congress on the impact of sanctions. They got it from us. And then the Congress Subcommittee on Human Rights and Health wrote a report to the White House and to Congress that our sanctions are hurting human rights. We are supposedly policemen of human rights, but our sanctions are hurting people. They are killing women, they are killing children, they are depriving them of healthcare, education, midwives, and so women are dying while giving birth. And we have to remove these sanctions of the Zimbabwean people. And that is where the death of sanctions began. But our strategy, which we wrote, gave to government, some government officials took it and promoted as their own ideas, was also that we must galvanize the region. That is why our logo was first used for the anti-sanctions, SADC anti-sanctions campaign by certain government members. And then we galvanized the region, and we also went and made sure that we galvanized South African government to be the one that spearheads this fight. And you must understand that the South African government has lost its relationship with the West because of standing with Zimbabwe, Russia, and standing in the position that we have. They also denounced the opposition. They basically made the opposition useless on the continent after denouncing them as puppets of the West. That's part and parcel of our work. There are plenty of videos you can watch in which we make these entreaties to the South African government. And then, of course, we took them to court. We took implementers of US sanctions to court so that we could start creating legal precedents. And Joe Biden responded to those papers because he knew the implications. This is what brought down sanctions. And we had humanitarian lawyers, we had tribunals taking place in the background. So guys, give credit where it's due. And the reason I'm taking my credit and taking our credit for ZASM is we want Zimbabweans to be encouraged to give solutions to their country without fearing that government officials are going to steal their ideas. And for those who thought that me and the president are sitting in different places, we are here only because the president gave us a green light and support for us to be here. This is his victory. This is a national victory. Don't get it twisted.